right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is another episode of Dive Cuts. I'm Matt Harris, and my voice in this position probably sounds very, very strange to you. It probably also may not sound as good as the one that's usually here. Unfortunately, Sam Snelling can't be with us to record this week. He's got, I think his wife's birthday is on Monday. So we are actually going to record on Sunday today. And that means it's me and Matt Watkins. And we're going to talk all about Missouri basketball, which you may or may not be eager to hear about. But that's why you download this podcast and what we get paid to talk about. So after that stilted intro, Matt, how are you doing today? And are you ready to get really into the weeds of what is looking like a really rough season for Mizzou?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Staying warm. Fighting the lighting here in my basement / studio with the very white outdoors beaming in through the windows. So yeah, it's cold. Mizzou's shooting's gone cold, and I'm here.
I'm trying to fight. If somebody watches this on the video stream, there's a lovely overhead light that's causing all kinds of fun stuff here. We're not going to do well in room raiders. I guess the best way to say this is just to jump into it. Missouri is coming off an 0-2 week. They are now 0-3 in the SEC. They lost 90-77 on Tuesday night at Kentucky. And then yesterday, in a game that I'm sure we're going to just revel in, a 71-69 overtime loss to South Carolina. And at this point, I don't know what positives there are. I don't know what autopsies are going to turn up that can really inspire hope, but we'll sift through the wreckage here. And I guess the best way to sort of start here is to look at the game that was most recent. That was yesterday. And I'll just throw it open. Your initial thoughts on what was a game that I thought Missouri had 2 or 3 chances to secure, but ultimately did not go their way. And now they're in a really tough spot.
Yeah, it's that one was that was a tough loss. Both the Georgia and South Carolina games, when you looked at the schedule, even back in late December, those were games you circled that Mizzou needed to win. I don't want to say anything bad about South Carolina or Georgia, but I would be a little surprised if they finish top half in the league. And if they don't, you really need to win the bottom half games at home. And Mizzou had a chance in both of those games and didn't. Yesterday, it wasn't a very pretty game, but there was never a real thought that South Carolina was going to go on a run, which to some extent Mizzou should be applauded for that. There was they gave up a 7-0 run to start the game, but other than that, I don't think South Carolina ever strung 3 baskets together in a row. It was they had their chances, and I believe they were up 3 at the under 4 timeout, and even then, you felt like all Mizzou needs to do is execute at an average level down the stretch, and they were going to pull it off, and they didn't. So that's a tough loss, probably even tougher than the Georgia game. Mizzou needed that one; they were in position to get it, and it didn't happen.
Yeah. I think we were joking, that the first team to sort of go on an 8 or 10-0 run probably gets the result in this one. It was that kind of game. I think it was largely played on South Carolina's terms. The pace was pretty modest for them. I thought South Carolina was getting kind of the shot distribution it normally wants in terms of 3-point shots, but they weren't shooting the ball particularly well. I think Mizzou deserves a little bit of credit defensively for some contests, but there were some other ones where I just thought it wasn't South Carolina's day. They weren't converting on some open looks, and so when you're having that kind of day from an offense that's been maximizing those, that's a benefit. And also Missouri, some of it was Missouri's pressure, creating turnovers, but some of it was just South Carolina not valuing the ball. When you have a team that's at 2 times its normal turnover rate, it's not making shots. It felt like that was a game, we've talked about in the past where teams have created conditions for Missouri to get a win. And, they're up 3. I think when they go into the under 4, they're up 58-55. You felt like if they could just, do what veteran teams do down the stretch, they would get a win. And that clearly didn't happen. And I think the hardest part is going to be, the end of regulation, where they've just got to – one guy's got to stay in the hole near the free throw line. The other guy's got to get out and close down a shooter. That switch gets blown. and now you've got overtime. And, South Carolina, I think, carrying between regulation and overtime, went on an 8-2 run and really opened it up. They didn't get a lot of offensive execution, but they got it at the right time. And I don't know realistically if this one is going to be easy to forget, because these are the games where I think you want a lot of experience to show through. You want your guys to come down and getting good offense. You want them to recognize what good shots are. You want them to be able to execute basic defensive assignments. You want them to convert the front ends of 1-and-1s. It's just like, I think yesterday was dispiriting because there's a lot of hallmarks in that game that you want to see from a veteran team that's in a tight spot, and they just don't get it. And now you start to worry about knock-on effects. But I didn't know what stood out to you just sort of about the last 4 or 5 minutes of that ball game, because it seems like that's everything else that came before it we could talk about, but really that's the whole ball of wax. There's really the in-game setup for them.
Well, offensively, it's been a common thread since they got into league play. I ran some numbers earlier this morning doing the game reviews, and I looked at the last 15 possessions of each game, which last game would have been overtime and back into regulation. But the last 15 possessions, you can say about the last 6 to 8 minutes, depending on the pace of a game. So obviously that includes crunch time as well. But Mizzou's offense has just been bad. It's been bad during that time. Over those, I think, 45 possessions I looked at, they're averaging a 0.733 points per possession, which is, if that were over the course of a full game, would be among, if not the worst in America.
Yeah.
Their effective field goal percentage in those 45 minutes total is a 20.7. So each shot is worth roughly 0.4 points per possession, or points per shot, I should say. And the thing that really sticks out is they only have 2 turnovers in the last 3 end of game scenarios, which that's not bad. But then you look at their shot profile. They've taken 15 threes, 20 mid-range jumpers, and 6 ring attempts. They have gotten to the free throw line 20 times. We'll count at 22 since they missed 2 front ends in overtime yesterday. But 35 out of 41 shots they've taken that counted as field goals were jumpers of some sort. And they went 1 of 15 from three-point range, and they've made 2 of 20 in the mid-range. They're shooting 10% on the worst shots in basketball, and they're taking them more frequently than anything else. They're not hitting their three-point shots, which some are good, some are bad. And I think, in theory, to me, this kind of looks like a team that is their best offensive players are just, they're not executing in crunch time. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that those 3 guys are playing 30 minutes plus a game. And it's, anyone who's played basketball knows it's hard to shoot jumpers when you're tired. And if you're playing 35 minutes a game, your legs might be gone in the last 5 minutes. And granted, Sean East was out I will allow that he was out for a little bit during the Kentucky game, which is included in this, when he took a nasty bump to his eye, but still.
There's some quality shots down the stretch there too, that you got Tamar Bates getting some quality looks, and Carter getting some quality looks. So you and I have talked a lot about kind of the shot profile for this group. And I think the hard part here is this is a group that is more mid-range oriented. Sean East is but over the long course of this season has been their best offensive threat. And this has been a recurring theme for him at UMass, at Bradley, at Johnny Logan last year and this year. He wants to sort of live in that 6 to 15 foot range. Now, sometimes it's a runner, sometimes it's a sweeping, like kind of baby hook, sometimes it's a pull up, but that's where he wants to operate and kind of play out of that toolkit. And so what you're seeing is a guy that's kind of taking the shots that are comfortable for him. But even if he's a high efficiency guy on those shots, they're still worth like what, 0.89, 0.91 points per attempt. You're not getting the same kind of value out of those attempts as you would be a straight rim attempt. Tamar Bates, I think, is getting better hunting for his shots, but people talk about, there's shades of Kareem Rush there, which sounds like a compliment, but Kareem spent a lot of time living in those in-between spaces offensively, and defenses are conceding those more. And, sometimes those are good shots, but, again, the value quite isn't there. Noah Carter, I think, is still a guy who is struggling to really get traction from about 6 foot and in. I've written about that. I think guys have figured out that, if you force him to his left hand, rim finishing for him is still going to be tough. And, Nick Honor at this point, is probably one of the biggest regressions I've seen from a player in a long, long time. And, I just don't know at this point, how much you can really rely on Nick to be a high efficiency player for you. And so what you've got are 2 guys that want to live in the mid-range, one who's struggling when he's driving the ball, and the one who's just struggling, period. You add the minutes to that, it's just not a good recipe for, in-game, execution for them. And I think the really hard part is, as we've talked about, look down the lineup. Where are alternatives that you can go to for those last 4 minutes? Caleb Grill is not back. Aiden Shaw is not an offensive threat that you can, in any real sense at this point. Ant Robinson, once he gets stronger and gets more experience, maybe he's a guy you want on the floor in the last 4 minutes. But, you look around, there's just not a lot of alternatives there. So the question's going to be, what can they do in these situations where they can't get away from playing heavy minutes, but, the guys that are shooting are tired and the shot profiles aren't good. I don't know what they are and, what the solution is here. I heard some criticism of, the in-game plays here. Dennis Gates, even if you can't factor in yesterday, grades out as one of the best coaches in the country for special teams in terms of efficiency. I mean, they're top 20 percentile nationally, top 80th percentile or better in out of bounds, underside, and ATOs. They're really, really good in special teams. And so, and that gets to the other thing is Dennis might draw up something fantastic in the huddle. The guys might understand it. They've got to go execute it. And I think that's where we are right now is, we've hit the end of where coaching can take them to where this is on the players on the floor and what their skill sets are. And that's frustrating if you're a fan, I understand, because it's like, you need those guys to play better. That's what it comes to. They just got to play better. And, we look at a lot of numbers and we watch a lot of tape, but end of the day, guys have to make shots and execute, what's drawn up, what the system is. And that's just not happening right now. And I don't have an easy solution sitting here on a Sunday in January for fixing it. Like, I think that's really the hard part.
There's one easy solution: make more shots, right?
Correct. And, I think we say that we saw the same thing on Tuesday night at Kentucky over the final 8 or 9 minutes. They didn't make a field goal for basically the final 10 minutes of that ball game.
I got the numbers here. I got that.
That's please share that, because that's let's depress people even more.
Okay, so they did make a field goal. Noah Carter did on the second to last possession.
Okay, I thought so.
I don't know if these possessions are exactly what the statistical savants have for the game possession number, but I have that as possession 76 of 77.
That would make sense, yeah.
The last field goal I have made before that was possession number 57, which was about 9.5 minutes to go, was a Aiden Shaw cut for a dunk. And before that, the last shot that was made was a Nick Honor contested 3-point attempt at possession 55.
Yep.
So, you're looking about 23, 24 possessions there where you have a garbage time bucket and
a 45 cut for a dunk.
Right. And that is your offensive output. Now, to Mizzou's credit, they did hit 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 11, 13 free throws in the process, which that is what kept them in the game. And I'm very pleased that they did that.
Yeah.
If you don't get those points, you're looking at a 25-point loss. But Mizzou did that, and they mainly did that from attacking the rim, which I'm not criticizing that whatsoever. No. Even if they weren't making field goals, if you're getting to the line and getting points, that's what you want to do. But it's just, it's a common thread. If that was the only game where that happened, it wouldn't be noteworthy. But every game since we've hit conference play, Mizzou has struggled in that crunch time, and it's all with the inability to make jump shots.
Yeah, and you saw it against Georgia coming out of the under 4. I think the first 3 or 4 trips out of that, they got a kill. They got 3 straight stops. And
let's go to the data.
It's basically at every under 4 for the last 3 games. It's just like you said. It's been a wasteland in terms of actually making shots.
Mm-hmm.
And the Kentucky game, I think, is palatable from a fan perspective because that expected margin was probably 12 or 13. If you factored in recent form, right. Missouri was a 24-point underdog. The fact that they hit the margin in that game is fantastic. I think that there were a lot of positives to draw out of the Kentucky game in terms of, I think, one, how the coaching staff adapted. I think they really figured out early on that Kentucky was targeting the living crap out of Nick Honor. They made some smart moves with the press to kind of get Kentucky from walking into their stuff. I thought that was a really, really smart play. I thought they were smart when they subbed in guys like Mabor Majak or some of their deep guys when Kentucky was putting Ugan Yinso or Aaron Bradshaw in. They really did a smart job sort of managing risk in a game that I thought was going to get away from them. That coaching staff deserves credit for that and really, kind of putting out those fires early. Players on the floor deserve credit. We talked, Sam and I last week, about this was a game where we thought John East could have a really, really fun time getting baseline access. Sure enough, he did. Their base stuff was getting them to spots, getting them looks they wanted. Again, I thought they were smart with play calls when Kentucky put some inexperienced bigs on the floor. They ran more Princeton stuff and guys executed. And for the most part, for 30 minutes of that basketball game, I thought Missouri did everything it possibly could to position itself to apply game pressure, which, to bring it back to your point, the offense didn't do it for them. They got to the line and drew some fouls, but there were some quality looks, 3 or 4 in there where I thought that's a good shot within the flow of the offense. They got 2 threes on catch and shoots on the same possession off an offensive rebound and missed both. At some point, again, we can debate substitution patterns, rotations, anything else you want. Guys got to make shots, and that didn't happen on Tuesday. Even back to Georgia, I thought that was the same thing. They got 3 rim attempts down the stretch, didn't convert rim attempts. It's, I think a lot of people are going to kind of focus on it's time to bail out. What are they going to do? What's left? Guys have to make shots and they have to make plays. And, we're sort of giving short shrift to the Kentucky game flow here. But I think what we're looking at is a team that I worry about their confidence coming out of these 3 games. 3 games where they've been in position to get a win. 2-1 was never going to happen. 3-0 was never going to happen. But getting a win out of this stretch was highly likely. And to come up empty, and especially with 2 games, Georgia and South Carolina, the circumstances under which that happened, you really worry now about the confidence for being there for this group. But it's
in many ways they're kind of the opposite of last year's team. I don't think this year's team is a bad basketball team, but I think they're not a winning basketball team.
Yeah.
And the distinction there is what we've been talking about. They've played well enough in the last 3 games, and really outside of Illinois, all of the games, to have a chance to win in the second half, but they're not doing it. And, syntax, grammar, depends on your definition of good, bad. A lot of people will say winning basketball teams are good teams and losing basketball teams are bad. I look at it a little bit different. Mizzou's team last year, I don't think was a great basketball team, but I think they were a great winning team.
Yeah.
I think they were 13-3 in games decided by single digits. And this year, I believe it's 3-5 or 3-6.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference maker. The guys who can get it done when the game's on the line, those teams are considered the good teams. But does it really matter over the course of thousands of possessions if 10 of them make you a winning team or a losing team? You can debate that, but that's how I'm looking at it. For the first 30, 35 minutes of these last 3 games, Mizzou's went toe to toe and had every chance in the world to win those games. In the last 5-10 minutes, they didn't win any of them.
I'm like you. I try and take a more nuanced view, which is, for Dre Golson to hit 3 bankers, or for Dre Golson to hit 2 game winners last year, for Nick to basically hit a game winner, you had to be in position in crunch time for those shots to matter or to have any consequence at all. And those teams, I think, were fantastic in late game situations. They were porous defensively. They could be streaky shooters at times, but they were able to muster enough execution in the last 5 minutes to where they could position themselves with those types of plays to get made. And, Dre doesn't practice those shots, but, to be in position where those can swing a game and can tip a result in your favor requires some execution down the stretch. And frequently in some of those games, even before those 5 minutes, you would see them go, okay, we got to get the ball to Kobe, or we've got to start finding Demoy. There were guys that they could turn to and say, no matter how the offense is functioning, no matter how poorly we're playing defensively, we know that for 4 or 5 possessions in a row, we can go to a guy who's going to get us a quality shot, who's going to stabilize us. We can get to a timeout. We can make maybe some adjustments. We can reset, and we can go play. They don't have that this year. And it's sort of something we wrote in the preseason. You wrote a big piece about sort of what they're going to have to do from a collaborative approach. I wrote in the spring about missing Zay. The undertone of all that is there's nobody that they can turn to in a huddle and go, okay, we're going to run something for that guy, or we're going to keep calling, this action for 3 or 4 plays, and we're going to beat him to death, and we're going to get some points out of it. And even if the guys aren't scoring, even if they're not in the play, seeing those shots go in, seeing that success keeps them engaged, keeps that confidence there. And that's what I think about when I think about confidence eroding. They've been in 3 games now where they have not been able to execute, where they've been getting the ball to guys like Tamar, like Sean, like Noah. The first 4 possessions of overtime went to the 4 guys you want to have shoot. None of them made a shot. Like, at some point, I think that's cumulative. And, what's worrying now is you're out of entry to the SEC schedule that I thought was pretty favorable to them. And now, looking ahead to this week, this thing could pivot pretty quickly. And they've, I don't think they're that far from a precipice of, really being in a bad spot, being in a bad way. But is there anything else on Kentucky that you think we should talk about that stood out to you? I know we sort of ran through it, but I feel like in aggregate, they did what they needed to kind of do in that game. And we've sort of covered, most of the game flow with.
Kentucky was the better basketball team. That's all it came down to.
Yep.
And everything else, I think they did well. They just didn't have the talent that Kentucky did. And Kentucky's talent executed. Mizzou's executed, just not well enough down the stretch.
Yeah. You've already teed up kind of the in-game stuff here. We keep talking around it. Mizzou's 0-3. 0-2, you can survive. Plenty of teams have survived 0-2 in this league. But I looked this up yesterday. Since 2018, I left out the COVID season because that was weird from a scheduling perspective. So 2018, 19, 20, 22, and 23. 6 teams have started 0-4. Only one of them finished with better than 6 wins. And that team was Texas A&M. They started 0-5. They finished 9-9. They made the NCAA tournament, but that was a Texas A&M team that I think had just destroyed people in non-con. They had a really, really strong resume pre-conference. I think they entered conference in the top 30 in KenPom. They are a clear outlier. The average seed for those teams, the other 5 teams, is around an 11 or a 12 seed.
In the SEC tournament.
In the SEC tournament. In the SEC tournament. So basically, if you're 0-4, recent history suggests 6 wins is probably your ceiling, and getting out of Wednesday is not in the cards. And so that's all to say. They go to Bama on Tuesday. That game looms pretty large now for this season, and what they're going to do. And I'm just sort of curious, where do you think this team is trending right now? Is there a way that they can maybe scratch out 2 wins this week, or are we reaching a point where we have to sort of talk about this is a group that his fate is pretty much rendered at this juncture. We need to start taking the long view.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the last 2 weeks working on something that is the long view, so I guess in some way I'm already taking that. But,
yeah.
Me personally, when I watch it, I'm going to watch Mizzou play every game. I do it for multiple reasons. It's never going to be, if I'm checked out emotionally, if I'm checked in, it's the same thing for me.
Yeah.
I want Mizzou to win. I think it's great when they do. I don't like it when they lose, but as far as that emotion, everything else stays the same. So that being said, I'm never going to write a team off in an individual game. Basketball is such a crazy sport that the 3-point shot, if one team makes all of them, the other team misses all of them, crazy things can happen. So I'm not gonna write them off in either game. But this is a tough week. It's Alabama, I don't think is Kentucky, but Alabama is a team that if they get rolling a little bit, they can bury you in a hurry.
Yeah.
Kentucky, I think, is overall a better team, but if you catch Alabama on a bad night, you got a chance to win. If you catch them on a good night, it could get really ugly.
Yeah.
And then Florida, I think, is definitely better than South Carolina and Georgia. I don't know if I should say that, but I am saying it. So Mizzou's going to have to play better than what they've played the first 30 minutes in the last 3 games, and they're going to have to play in a different realm in the last 5 to 10 minutes to have a chance in either of these games.
Yeah.
So I would, if they could get one this week, I think Mizzou fans should be pretty pleased, to the extent you can anyway.
Yeah.
But I would say 0-2 is probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah. And that's, the win probability right now at Kim Palm is 7% for Tuesday night, 38% for next Saturday. To me, that's the game I have circled there. But Florida on paper right now is going to pose a test here. I mean, they get on the glass. They've got size. They're a team that right now, at least when I'm looking at it, is, not turning the ball over a ton. You can strip their ball handlers, but their turnover rate is still pretty respectable. They're 3rd in the country in offensive rebound percentage. That's bad news for Missouri. They want to play quick. They've got veteran guards. They've got guys in Kugel and Pullen who are really, really great in isolation. Going to be a tough game there. South Carolina's also had, not South Carolina, but Florida had as rough of an opening stretch as I could think. They had to play Kentucky at home. They had to go to Ole Miss that had gotten some reinforcements. They drilled Arkansas yesterday, though, in Gainesville. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it'll be a 22-point loss, but it's going to be an uphill challenge for them. If they go 0-5, then I think it'll be time. Some people would say it's already time, but I think that'll be the juncture where you can start to really talk about that this team's got a ceiling that probably ends on Wednesday, come March. And Sam wrote about it today. I think he started asking the question of when is it time to shift? I think he's got a lot of really, really good points in there. I'm working on a piece, now that's sort of looking at, what the lineup data is telling us about what a shift should look like. And we can talk about that a little bit. Sam and I kind of hit on it last week. I think there's a clear sense, at least from fans that communicate with us online, that they would love just to see the freshmen play 20 minutes a night. My response is, I don't think that's a good idea. So I'm just going to, this is not an articulate way to ask, what does the shift start to look like for you with this roster? If things don't go well Tuesday night, what do you think a shift needs to look like for this team and this set of players?
I'm kind of tackling that with what I'm doing and will be released in the near future. But to me, you really have to think about what you have coming back next year or what you're wanting to come back next year. Obviously, Mizzou's going to be losing some seniors. Nick Honor, Sean East, and Noah Carter are going to be departing, possibly others as well. But I really think you need to ask yourself the hard question of what do I want next year's team to look like? And I think that Tamar Bates has certainly given you an indication that you want him back next year. He's been in what is progressing into a lost season. He's been a revelation.
He's been really good.
Aiden Shaw kind of flashes and then regresses, flashes, regresses. And I shouldn't say regress, but just steps back out of the spotlight, so to speak. When he flashes, he is very flashy. When he is not doing those things, he's barely on the court offensively.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to look and take stock of what guys you want to see, or what guys you think you want to have, and you're going to build around next year, including the freshmen. And then I think you might, this might not be what everyone wants to hear, but I think you do want to give some run to the guys that you're not sure about, and I'm not putting anyone's name out there individually, but if you want to see a guy who's not gotten a lot of time that has eligibility next year, give him some opportunity to show what he has. You need to both build and make decisions at the same time. Yeah. And that obviously means playing freshmen, playing guys who don't play as much, but you also need to know what you have. And when you've got guys who are juniors and seniors on your roster who haven't gotten a lot of time, I think it's beneficial to see what they have in extended time. Are these guys going to be pieces for you going forward? And if they're not, you need to know that. Yeah. So to me, I think you definitely you're going to want to get the freshmen involved. I think how they were doing it earlier this season is probably fine with me. When you've got Jordan Butler and Trent Pierce playing 5-10 minutes a game, Anthony Robinson playing 15 minutes a game. I don't think these guys need to be in the starting lineup and you just play them for 30 minutes a game and see what happens. And I say that for one big reason. Yes, that gets them experience, but you don't want guys to go out there as freshmen and just to get their brains beat in. Yeah. You're not building anything by doing that. Yeah. So you want to do it intelligently, but I would like to see them play more than they played the last two games once we hit that point.
Yeah. I think that's an important point here is I think there's everyone sort of, you and I know it's ceteris paribus. We assume all minutes are equal, that and everything's linear. Like the more minutes I give to Trent, the more benefit that will naturally occur, and it will be in this sort of linear path here. And that's not at all how this works. Everyone's skill curve and trajectory is very, very different. And, I think there's a human element that gets lost here is if you put guys out there and they get their brains beat in, one, does that affect their confidence, going into summer, into an off season that is probably the most important in their development? Do you want them going in, not just feeling like, okay, I got to play a lot, but you want them feeling like the minutes I got showed me what I can do, and here's what I need to add. I look at, Jordan Butler's minutes against Georgia. Russell Chewa caved his head in on 3 or 4 possessions. He got called for 2 hand checks, getting caught in bad switches. He missed 2 rim attempts. He played, 7-8 minutes. Somebody might say, well, good. Now he knows he needs to get stronger in the post. It's like, well,
we knew that.
That didn't take playing 8 minutes a game for us to discover that. And more importantly, does Jordan Butler walk into practice feeling like, okay, it's January. I've gone through summer workouts, a trip to Jamaica, and fall camp. And when I get to SEC play in the games that really matter, I'm getting eaten alive. Some guys, will take that as a challenge. Some guys, may have some doubt.
Right.
I'm not trying to get in Jordan's head. I'm just saying we all assume that that lump that he took in that game is going to have a benefit for him, and that we should not only hold that exposure level, we should increase it. And I think there's a lot of frustration, I guess, because people want to see these freshmen. They worry that not playing them is going to lead to them transferring. Well, here's the thing. If they play and they're not good and Missouri stinks, maybe that leads to them thinking this staff doesn't have the right setup for me. This staff isn't using me right. This staff is putting me in a position to fail. I want to go to a place where that's not going to happen. Or conversely, maybe let's say Trent Pierce blows up and has a really, really good run of games, but Mizzou is terrible. Maybe Trent goes, I played really, really well. The system isn't good. I'm going to go somewhere else. Like, there's not this one line that I think gets drawn through where playing more minutes means happy freshmen, which means they stay. There's an entire human element that's being played out here, and only the staff knows when guys are ready for increases and decreases in minutes and exposures and roles. So I think that's the thing that's frustrating for fans is you might watch this team play and seemingly bash its head against a wall and assume there's some other better alternative, or at least the freshmen can't be any worse. When in reality, the outcome could be worse.
We've seen them play enough to know that that's a legitimate possibility, and that's no knock on them. That is not the deal with freshmen in 2024.
And so I think that's
playing against 23 and 24-year-old guys in basketball right now. Right. Every team has them. You know, you want to build them up, but you want to do it the right way.
And I guess the thing I have sort of seen is it sounds great right now to say play them because everyone's supply of patience is infinite. Give it 3 or 4 games when they watch the product on the floor. You and I have watched young teams play.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to call on the youngsters, you better be ready for some questionable basketball and give a lot of grace. And that's not to say these freshmen are bad, but they're playing against veteran teams in a top 3 conference. The results aren't going to, I think, be this thing where you're going to be like, oh man, we get 10 minutes of Trent from what he showed at Minnesota. That may not be what you get. So that's just a word of caution as we begin to move into what I think is going to be a period where people are going to keep banging the gavel saying, play him more, play him more. There's a real human element and a diplomacy involved in shifting towards freshmen that is only understood by the guys in that room and in those practice gyms. That's us not carrying water. That's just acknowledging a reality that.
And I may have a segue here. Let's see if this segues. The other consideration you have is Nick Honor, Noah Carter, and Sean East all play a lot of minutes. I do think their minutes are going to come down. But those guys were important parts of your program. This is probably a lost season, but those guys were important parts of building this program from year 1 to year 2. They're all transfers. Showing that you're going to play your transfers is also a vital part of college basketball in 2024. So, ergo, yes, we want to play the freshmen, but when you play the freshmen, if that comes directly and wholly at the expense of your upperclassmen transfers, when you go into the spring transfer portal saying, hey, here's what we have in NIL, and here's what your role is going to be, and you show them that you benched those 3 guys for the last 10 games just to play freshmen, those guys have pro careers. We look at this from a Mizzou only situation, but last thing, and then we'll segue. I heard someone mention or ask me the other day, like, at what point in time does this team quit? My answer to that is never because each and every one of those guys has a pro career that they're trying to give some tape on, to say, hey, this is me at my best. They're not going to just stop playing. That's silly. We didn't think, or at least I didn't think, we probably wouldn't think that a guy like Trey Gomillion is going to go have a pro career. Guess what? He is. He's trying to have a pro career. All of these guys want to play professionally. So you have to keep that in mind when you're doing this transformation from playing your best players, which they are, to going to the freshmen. It's just another consideration you have to make. And if you don't, people who you want to transfer in this spring are going to notice that. I promise you they're going to notice that.
They will absolutely notice it. It's the hard conversations I don't think are far away. And but I think a lot of us assume that like this is, like Nick Honor, if you told, like I hear people say all the time, Nick Honor should absolutely just be on the bench. You have Nick Honor still showing up every day in your locker room.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Robinson, if you play him more than Nick Honor, he is going to absolutely have awful games. You know what he's going to need? He's going to need a locker room with a veteran that's going to be able to keep him in a good headspace. And if you offend Nick and, get him to basically tap out, you're not creating a good climate for that to happen. So yes, this is all of us, a long way of us saying a lot of different things around. They're probably going to have to transition, but I think how that actually mechanically unfolds is still probably going to be frustrating for people to watch.
I would agree.
But there's going to be a lot of moving parts. There's going to be a lot of sort of, I keep saying diplomacy because that's really what this is. They're managing 15 people and their own aims and aspirations in all of this. We just want to see them win basketball games. They've got to, actually deal with kind of the human element in all this. And, I think, this is sort of the easy segue. I think a lot of Missouri fans thought this year, in a best case scenario, was going to be avoiding the hard part of what a rebuild is. Maybe you weren't going to make an NCAA tournament. Maybe you weren't going to, earn a 7 or 8 seed, but you'd go 18-13. You'd in an NIT. You'd send these seniors out, with a bunch of thanks. You'd hit the portal and you'd get your nice freshmen, and you wouldn't really have to go through a hard reset. That's out the door now. And now they're going to have to do the hard part of program building, and that's something you're taking a look at. And I think, I'll let your piece come out when it does, but I'm just sort of curious here because we keep talking about what's the retention sweet spot here. What's, the right number of guys you need to hold on to. What do those guys look like? And realistically, what is the best case for those guys? And I'm specifically thinking of freshmen coming out of this year. Like, just let's start it there. We talk about the players you want to keep. What's the retention sweet spot, just in broad terms?
As far as total people on the roster or total players on the roster?
Yeah, let's start there, and then we can maybe talk about freshmen.
Okay. Well, I think anytime I'm trying to think of how to frame this without giving away everything I'm working on, because I want everyone to read this. This is going to be good. But you want the freshmen to come back, obviously. I think Tamara and Aiden Shaw have done enough to earn an invitation back. Now, whether they do want to come back or not, that's a whole nother thing. We always got to look at this. It's not just Mizzou gets to pick who they want, and that's what it's going to be. So I think those 5, I haven't seen enough from some of the guys towards the end of the roster who have eligibility left, like a Kurt Lewis, and even Jesus Carolero. He's getting a lot more minutes, but he wasn't getting a lot more minutes earlier. Yeah. So, how much do you want to see of those two? Those immediately come to mind. You've got 5 freshmen coming in, and here's where I add my point of caution. You have 3 freshmen that you want to come back next year, and you have 5 freshmen that you're bringing in. That's 8 freshmen and sophomore players that you've recruited, that you've handpicked, that you want to build this program. How much time are you wanting to give them next year? Yeah. This is all a process. When you are doing a recruit or an identify, recruit, develop, and retain strategy, this is how it goes. You don't just get to say, we want all these freshmen, but then we're going to bring them in and not play them. Guess what happens when you do that?
They go.
Your entire strategy is gone. So what you're looking at as far as retention, at least in my opinion, is yes, you want the freshmen back. I think, again, Aiden and Tamar have done enough that you want ideally to bring them back to help these guys along next year and be competitive. 5 freshmen coming in, and that leaves you with 10 guys. There's some question marks I have out there, and it's not because they're not good. It's just I haven't seen them enough or haven't seen them in the right situations, and we're not at that point yet where we have. So I think that's what I'm looking at right now as far as about 10 guys that I would feel comfortable slotting into next year's roster.
Yeah. What does success look like for this freshman group? I know you're using Evan Maya's BPR, which is Bayesian, which basically like staggers up like every 1 point increase is worth 50 spots in like the player rankings essentially. So
yeah, I don't have that right in front of me, but I would say like the top don't quote me on this, but like the top 500 players or so are a 3.0 plus.
Yeah.
Right. So thereabouts. And that's the type of guys that you're wanting to build your program around.
Yeah.
Top 500 players. Granted, you can't have 15 top 500 players. It just doesn't work that way because there's 5,500 players in college basketball. But the thing that you want to take away is the development year over year. And this freshman class is performing about how you'd expect them to, even going back historically. They are a good class. They're not great. They're not a great class by rankings. I think they finished, the three-man class was at 27th.
Yeah.
Which is good. You can build around that. But I don't believe any of them were in the top 75 if memory serves.
No. Trent Pierce got into the 80s of the composite index.
So, just you're looking at guys that are probably a 1.0, a 2.0, which is well down the bell curve as far as the BPR goes. And I'm not going to get too much into that now, but just they're top half players in college basketball. Maybe not by much, but thereabouts. And then you want to see them increase year after year. So it's not surprising. Next year's class has two guys that project, at least via rankings, to be better than that. Andrew Boateng, of course, is a top 30 type prospect, which, when you look at a guy like that, your development curve is he's a contributor. He's a contributor year one, and you're hoping that year two is a big one because he's probably gone after that.
Yeah. When I looked at it right now, so the BPR for Trent Pierce is 1.7. So Trent's approaching probably like top 750 in the country. Right. Granted, that's on moderate minutes at this point. Anthony Robinson's around 0.9, so pretty close to average. And Jordan Butler's at minus 0.28, which is, again, close to average. So you've got guys that, who have played more, who are typical college basketball players on about 20 to 30% of minutes, 20 to 40% of minutes per game. Trent will be harder to peg down because he hasn't gotten as many consistent minutes. But from everything we've talked about and you've talked about with me, this is a typical freshman class for a team that Dennis Gage is a member of a staff of.
Yes.
So the freshmen are, I think people are going to say they've looked really great. They've flashed in context, in like historical context. They're pretty solid freshmen. Like even if I looked at the BPR ratings for freshmen in the SEC, they're outside the top 10. So they've been solid to okay, but I wouldn't say that they've, if you look at the totality of what they've done, I wouldn't say that they have, left anybody floored here. But that's important context or important, background, because it means this summer's pivotal for them.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest gains, the spring and summer is pivotal for them to begin to translate, because I think year two is where you're going to see the biggest gains for them. And so what we're saying here essentially is, if you bring those three back, you need them to develop and sort of, I think, move from spots 7, 9, and 10 in the rotation probably into the top 8 if you're doing development right. We know historically, as you just said, Honor Batang and maybe Marcus Allen should be guys that can come in and be a factor. So we're looking at 5 underclassmen realistically in the top 8. Mm-hmm. Is that probably the best way to think about it? It's going to be.
Yeah, I won't say top 8, but I would say top 10 at least.
Solidly rotation guys, 5
right.
underclassmen.
Since we always have a longer rotation than we're used to now with Coach Gates. But yes, I would say of the top 10, you want those 5. Andrew Boateng, Marcus Allen, and the 3 returning freshmen to be in your top 10. If one of those guys isn't, as a sophomore, historically speaking, it's probably not going to happen.
And again, this is also baking in Aiden Shaw and Tamar Bates returning. So again, that is 5 underclassmen, 2 veteran returners in your top 10. And we have not seen maybe enough of Zeus or of Kurt Lewis to really say whether or not they should slot into that group at this point. Right. So what we're saying is,
I will say before we go on, I'm still not 100% sure Zeus has another year.
And he
That's a big question. So he may not even have another year. I think that would require a medical red shirt. Where he played. So, that's an unknown. I'm not even sure he's eligible for another year. But
we're being liberal. We're being liberal with it. So this is all a way of saying there are 3 spots realistically that you would feel like going into next year program building wise. You could say that if you're 5 underclassmen, okay, you guys, we expect you to kind of come in and be contributors. That would leave you going to T.O. Barrett, Peyton Marshall, and Trent Burns and saying, guys, just be patient with us for the next year. We're going to do some skill development stuff. And I think that like those 3 guys understand that. I think Peyton Marshall and Trent Burns are all going to understand that, like, from a strength and conditioning perspective, they've each got sort of tasks they've got to handle. But what I'm saying is we're looking at 3 spots right now, and that may influence what they have to do in spring. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I would say so. Again, you're striking a balance here based on what you want to do. 3 guys would be about right as far as scholarship goes, and what 3 guys, 3 portal additions. But you could bring in more. There's nothing preventing you from doing it except money, we don't know anything about that. But the problem is once you go past 3, if you're bringing in guys who are better than your freshmen and sophomores, they're going to be upperclassmen and they're going to want to come and play. They're not going to want to come and sit on the bench. And when you do that, your freshmen aren't going to be playing. And these are the guys that you're theoretically wanting to build your program around. So I would agree with you that 3 is probably the sweet spot. And that's, even when we're talking about a 10-man rotation and Barrett, Peyton, and Trent, those guys are still going to get some minutes. They will. They're not going to sit on the bench unless it's a complete red shirt. We've seen that this year. Mizzou's played 14, 15 guys in non-garbage time minutes. So they're going to get some playing time. It's just not consistent.
Yeah. And, as we kind of press up against the hour mark here, I think what this is all leading to is it's January, they're early conference, but it's already time to portal shop. That's just the reality now. It's happening. I know it's happening. We know names of guys that are looking around already. Just globally, though, what would you say they need right now? Like, you've got 3 spots. You want to go to the portal, and you can make the smart requisite ads that you think are going to fit good program building. What do you think they would need to do?
Well, positionally, there's without question they need a primary ball handler. You're losing Sean East and you're losing Nick Honor this year. Anthony Robinson, I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be quite good next year. But even if you're bringing him back, which hopefully they do, you have a sophomore, and then you have T.O. Barrett is kind of ish a point guard. Can probably handle that. But again, we're looking at a guy who ideally is probably towards the tail end of the rotation, and you're way too light as far as your ball handling. So you want a guy there, preferably one who can carry a little bit of the offensive load. We saw with Nick this year, he struggled with that. Last year, he was a very good point guard, but didn't really factor that much into the offense. You need a guy who's used to carrying offensive possessions and can make plays for himself and others. Sean East is a great example of that. If you had another year of Sean East, that would be great, but you don't. Someone more in that mold. I think probably another area that you're going to want to hit on is a perimeter wing spot. Wing, combo guard, whatever you want to call it, a shooter. Next year's team, I like how it's getting built up, but you're probably going to be lacking a little bit with outside shooting. Tamar Bates has been very effective, but everyone else that you're looking at is either very young or inconsistent. So you're looking at something like that. And then the third spot is a question mark, and I think it's kind of where they're wanting to head. I think they're probably going to want to add some size, but are they going to want to look for a more skilled offensive player that allows them to continue running their Princeton offense sets where you have the big man out front handling the ball, and maybe lose a little something defensively by bringing him in? Or are you going to want to go for someone who's more of a defensive athletic threat, but not as skilled offensively? Because the Kobe Brown was kind of both. He wasn't great defensively, but he's about as close as you're going to get.
He was average.
Things together. And those guys don't come around very often.
Right.
So
I think that's for the context here too. We won't list names now. I just don't think that's very wise because they're not in the portal.
Right.
But we're tracking guys. But what I will say is historically, ball handlers are not hard to find in the portal. It's harder to find, slashing wings. You can find scoring combos. Guys who are probably that 6'3", 6'4", they're not quite going to run the point, but they can play in some PNRs, they can play in some ISOs, and you trust them enough to spot up. To your point, though, it's really hard, even if you go down to the mid-major level, to find guys in that sort of Kobe Brown mold. A lot of times they are basically big wings that have been knocked down to the 4 spot, and defensively, when they're playing guys, they're playing some bigger guys, but they're not hyper athletic 4s and 5s. They're able to sort of play with strength, play behind. The schemes are able to sort of cover up that a little bit. And frankly, they're not playing SEC level 4s. The trade-off.
Noah Carter.
Carter.
He's a very, very good example. And he was a very good playmaking 4 at a mid-major level. That is the transition you're looking for a well above average player in the transfer portal.
And I know he hasn't shot the ball as well this year, but for large stretches, he's done what you want those guys to do in transferring up. So I know some people are going to say, oh, Noah hasn't been as great this year. Noah's not done this. Noah's as close to the best case scenario for those kind of stretch 4s as you can get. The problem that you run into is if you want to get a more athletic, 4, you may have to take another young guy who's looking to reboot.
And not as skilled offensively.
So what you're going to have to do is decide, okay, do we feel like we've got enough athleticism with our freshmen who haven't had to defend at this level, and we can, compromise and get someone who can run our stuff? Or conversely, do we simplify our offense and do we go try and find maybe a freshman or a sophomore who's not happy with their situation, or maybe there's been a coaching change? We can get them into our environment. We can show them what we've done for Tamar and how we've helped him sort of reboot, and we can play it that way. So I think what you would feel good about is I'm looking for a wing, looking for a guard, but really that 3rd spot is going to be fascinating to watch as it goes through the year. So that I think that's really where we are at this point.
And we'll talk more about that in the future as we get closer.
As we get closer. Believe me, when I say this, what are we at? We're at 50 names of guys that we're already watching.
I'm already watching games of guys.
Same here. We were doing that.
DVRing them.
As am I. Our YouTube accounts and our DVRs are full. And we would encourage you all to do the same because it means you watch more basketball, and watching more basketball is always a good thing. But that's all I've got today. Hopefully we're ending it on a note that I think, is pretty practical. We haven't talked a lot about the games this week or X's and O's this week or anything else. But I think, moving forward, barring a change in results, it's good to sort of have more global conversations and sort of, I think, fit what's happening right now into sort of a more longitudinal outlook. This is frustrating. It's not enjoyable to watch. Our tweets sometimes are a little too snarky and persnickety, but this is a growing pain. The staff has done a good job in prep recruiting. I think we'll see what they can do in the spring, in terms of elevating the guys who come in. But you can add a final note to this if you want, Watkins. This is globally what pretty solid and healthy rebuilds look like. We just flipped years 1 and 2 on them.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that this thing's going to go right and that this is just a brief bump in the road, but what we're seeing right now is not abnormal. It's not, something that would have alarm bells flaring. It's just Mizzou couldn't avoid a little harder reset than most programs have. Even with the portal, even with some stuff here, we're seeing other teams across the country struggle with portal additions. But I think the important thing is to look at what they're doing, from an overall construction standpoint, I still think there's reasons that should ease some frustration or some anxiety right now. But I'll let you get a final word before we get out of here.
Sure. No, I get it. I follow Mizzou basketball. I've watched them for 30 years. So I get it that whenever you hear the word rebuild or reset, it sucks. Yeah. Mizzou's been through it. I think this is their sixth such reset, and not all of them, most of them haven't gone well. So anytime that you see that process, I understand the trepidation of wanting to go through it or needing to go through it again. But I would encourage you to understand that this is Dennis Gates' first reset at Mizzou, because other people have failed or have left after having a fair amount of success, like Mike Anderson. Just because it's not went well in the past does not mean that the new coach is not entitled to that. This is his best way, or the way he sees best, to rebuild the program. And I would encourage you to go back and look at the programs that Dennis Gates has been a part of. He has built them. Yep. Whether he can do it at Mizzou or not, I don't know. It's impossible to know. But there's nothing in his track record that indicates that he doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to program building.
Yeah. It's just a process. It is not always enjoyable. It stinks, especially when the weather's like this. But, again, we're not telling you not to feel frustrated, not to feel anxious. We would just encourage you just to step back, take a look at, some broader stuff. And if you still feel that way, that's fine. But I think there's some reason to sort of ease up a little bit. Otherwise, this is our recording for the week. We'll be back next week. Would encourage everyone to go to the site, Rock Game Nation, and check out what we're doing. We've got a lot of writers now. I've lost track of how big the masthead is. Bart Gilliam, Jaden Luce are doing a great job for us every day. They're on the ground in Columbia. We're really happy with what they're doing, to kind of keep things plugged in and keep you up to date on the nuts and bolts. Watkins, as you mentioned, is working on a big piece, sort of looking at program building. I'm chipping away on something on the lineup. Come read about football. Come read about all the other fantastic Olympic sports. We've got wrestling. We've got a wrestling writer. We've got somebody writing about gymnastics. It's the entire panoply of Missouri athletics is being covered. Thanks for listening to this pod. We hope you subscribe. You can do it on all platforms. That's Apple. That's Spotify. I think we're still in the Google Play Store. I can't recall. But with that, I'm going to get out of here. We're going to go about our day. And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, just click the subscribe button below. And you can find this podcast through the Apple Podcast app or for iPhone, or the Google Podcast app for Android, or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We are also available on Spotify. Just search for Rock M Radio. And if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network is a podcast network that has coverage of all other teams, Major League Baseball, MLS, NFL, whatever you want to listen and read about. It is a great network full of really fantastic podcasts. So look them up and subscribe to any and all of those podcasts. Rock M Radio will be back with more episodes coming soon. Thanks.